Thanks so much for joining. I'm really excited to be sharing uh, our Hubbub's kind of campaign method with you today, looking at playful and creative messaging and creating a positive buzz online. Um, it's really great to be sharing this with schools. So hello to everyone who's joining today, and also to everybody who's watching on the video online. So my name's Holly Smith, and I'm a creative partner at Hubbub. And Hubbub is a creative environmental charity. We're all about inspiring action that's good for the environment and for everyone. We run campaigns that tackle environmental issues with practical solutions that work for individuals, community groups, and businesses. We're trying to reach a mainstream audience, so people who might care about the environment, but they're juggling all types of other concerns. That could be studies, money, family, their health, loads of things. So in order to make sure that people have time and attention for this, we try and talk about the things we know people care about, and that's the food we eat, the clothes we wear, our homes, and our local green spaces. But it's a big challenge. What is the challenge? I think it's the fact that we know that 83% of the UK public are worried about the climate crisis, but at the same time, they are unclear about what they can do about it. So we aim to make people both willing and able to make green choices in their everyday lives. I'm going to come back to that willing and able piece kind of throughout my presentation, because it's about how Hubbub brings about behaviour change. We think people need to be both willing and able in order to make that change. And we do this by creating inspiring comms and behaviour change campaigns. But we also recognise that changing at the individual level is hard. So we work with community groups, local organisations, as well as loads of businesses that you might have heard of. And we partner with these groups because they have really big reach and influence. And in order to reach that mainstream audience, we think it's really important to meet people where they are at. And if we can partner with these organisations and these brands, then we can shape their systems and comms in a way that people who are already interacting with them can weave it into their lives. And then we're one step closer to making that eco-friendly green option the default. So kind of quick run through about how Hubbub creates campaigns. And I guess the first bit is we start by taking an environmental problem. And hopefully it's one that we think people have a role in tackling. And we establish the question and kind of think about how we'd like to experiment with that. So for example, let's take the problem that 80% of plastic in the oceans is carried there by rivers. So if all this litter in the oceans is coming from land, how do we connect people with their rivers and waterways to prevent litter getting there in the first place? The next step is discover. And I think this is where Hubbub gets quite curious. We do a deep dive to understand the issue, the audience, and the location. And this insight really enables us to build ideas based off solid knowledge, evidence, and also start to weave in that behavioural science and nudge theory that will hopefully get people moving along. Okay, and then the next one is create and collaborate, which is what Hubbub are quite well known for. Here we nail down the interventions, the messaging, the comms plans if you're using social media, and how the design looks and feels. And we also try and communicate through things that we know people care about again, so that's saving money, feeling healthier, and we often know that the environmentally friendly option actually has these co-benefits. They can be cheaper, they can make you feel better, you can connect with your local community if you're sharing items. And we'll always use like a splash of playfulness and positivity. We don't think that getting people to change behaviour works if we're telling them they're always doing the wrong thing. So going back to that example of plastic in the sea coming from land, our campaign that we came up with from that environmental problem, we discovered that a lot of people didn't know that this was the case, and we were helping them to join the dots. So with our creative and collaborating campaign, we created something called Treasure Your River, which was a pirate-themed anti-littering campaign where we encourage people to get to know their local waterways, dress up like pirates, run litter picks, get on board local boats that were doing plastic fishing where they can pick litter out of the waterways. We created 2 litter-eating robot boats that looked like little pirate ships that you could control from the shore with a remote control, and they would snap up all the litter in the waterways. And we worked alongside fishing communities, local rivers trusts, litter picking groups, and I think local restaurants as well. So that kind of speaks to the experimental phase. We'd gone on to try all of these different elements, and we were measuring how each of these different parts of it were effective. We make sure that each project we make has its own evaluation framework, so we can test out what has the biggest impact, and kind of work out where it's not working. How will we be advertising to the right people? Is this the right place for it? And then when we've worked that out, that's when we move on to scale. So we decide the best way to share our impact and learnings. Does Hubbub take that idea and scale it and refine it elsewhere? Or, as we have done with projects like In the Loop and our community fridge network, do we open source our whole process, our resources, and give away the campaign to maximize its impact? We have done both. And because we want behavior change and our positive impacts to reach as many people as possible, we're totally open to sharing our good ideas if it can make the biggest change. So that's a bit about how we create campaigns. I'll run through our work in action. And I'll do so, hopefully, around the issue of litter, and how we've created campaigns around litter in a really creative and playful way. And you might think it's a really boring, dull topic that's kind of sad to think about, not got much hype around it, but actually I can prove that we've done so in a really positive way that's made a real buzz on social media. So what is the problem with litter? First, it really affects our neighbourhoods. It affects the pride that we feel about the community we live in, and it's often a vicious cycle. The more litter there is, the more people feel that it's okay to dump more litter. And second, it costs a huge amount to clear up litter. Councils are spending about £1 billion each year to clean up litter, which is a huge amount of money that could be spent elsewhere. The next one is that Hubbub is an environmental charity, and we know that litter has a big environmental cost too. Litter can get into the food chain, it can harm wildlife, it can get into waterways and break down into microplastics. And also, on top of that, litter can be a valuable resource. When it's dropped in places that we can't rescue it from, we're losing that material, which means we can't recycle it and use it again, which means more virgin materials have to be used to make more products. If you think about cans and drinks bottles, those are really recyclable materials that can be used again if we put them in the right place. So, just going to jump onto something you may have seen around. This is, now I'm hoping that most of you don't smoke, but it is, smoking cigarette butts are a really big problem. They are the most littered item in the world. It's estimated that 3.9 million cigarette butts are dropped in the UK every day alone, which is a huge number. And I was wondering if you know what cigarette butts are made from. I'll give you a moment to have a guess. So they're actually made from a hidden single-use plastic called cellulose acetate. And 6 trillion cigarettes are made each year, which equates to 1 million tons of that type of plastic. Yes, so someone in the chat has just guessed it. It is plastic. The little filter in there, yeah. And unfortunately, because they're so small, people don't think it's a big problem, but actually 6 trillion cigarettes, 1 million tons of plastic, 3.9 million litters in the UK, it is a kind of under the radar environmental problem that's also quite difficult to pick up. They're really small, and if you speak to street cleaners or you've ever done litter picks yourself, you can spend a lot of time trying to collect cigarette butts, but actually they're really hard to pick up, and it takes a lot of time for street cleaners to get hold of them, and they easily roll away, roll into drains, and when they get into the sewers, they can then flow into the local rivers and out to sea. So cigarette butts are a very big problem. So what did Hubbub come up with? So in 2015, we went to a street in London called Villiers Street to just kind of observe what was happening in there, because we knew the street had quite a big litter problem. We observed that the people who were dropping their cigarette butts on the floor were men coming out of a pub in the evening, often with their friends, and often around a sports match that they're watching in the pub and coming out having a cigarette break. And we used that insight of like when the litter was being dropped and who was dropping it to create this. Another thing we also noticed was the existing bins on the street for cigarettes. They were black. They were shaped in a cylindrical tube, and they were strapped to lampposts. So if it's dark and it's nighttime and you're looking for a cigarette bin, you can't see that either. So in order to kind of meet people with their being willing and able to make change, we created something that was really, really eye-catching. Normally the ballot bins are this type of yellow that you can see in the corner here, but this one on this screen is grey. So we created something that was bright yellow, they could definitely see. And then we wanted to make them willing to use it. So we asked them a question about something we knew about. And actually, our first question that we asked was, who is the best footballer in the world? Is it Ronaldo or Messi? And that question took the world by storm, and it reached 6 million people online. And since 2015, we have sold bins to 43 countries around the world, and they're collecting an estimated 15 million cigarette butts every year. And I think the great thing about the ballot bin is that it's not telling people what to do. People can intuitively see how to use the bin, and they want to throw their cigarette butt in it rather than dropping it. And then going on to that scaling aspect. So we found out that this was a really great way to engage people to do the right behavior without ever telling them how or why to do it. And we moved on to this bin, which we called the big ballot bin. So moving on from cigarette butts, we know that more than 20 pieces of litter are dropped per second, and that equates to 2 million pieces of litter per year in the UK. And as I've mentioned, councils spend about £1 billion each year clearing up litter. So we use that insight of that kind of competition element, voting between two things to create this big bin. And again, we were hoping it would do well, but they went viral again. So 10 million people in the UK saw this bin, this kind of bin campaign, which is called Pick Your Side, which is 1 in 6 people roughly. And the hashtag reached 3.6 million people. And not only was it wildly successful on social media, it was really successful and actually dealing with the litter problem. So litter was reduced around the bin. So in a radius of 20 meters, drinks litter was reduced by 70% and food litter by 60%. And if litter is decreased, the councils can save money, the places that we live look better, and we do less damage to the environment. So that's 2 voting bins and how we move from one to the other. And we're trying to be really playful, asking people engaging questions. I really like the next bin. This is the disco bin. And we trialed this in Bournemouth, Dorset and Poole. The insight or the research we'd done in the area was that a lot of people were using the beach on their holidays and then leaving their litter on the beach overnight. And because of the way the tide works, unfortunately, that litter was being picked up and swept out to sea, making the beach look clean in the morning, but actually loads of rubbish had gone into the ocean. And we were just thinking creatively about how can we solve the issue of people, if it's the evening, not knowing where the bin is, it's a bit dark, and then also wanting to use the bin. So we had a few interventions in Bournemouth, Dorset and Poole. We put glow-in-the-dark wraparounds around some of the bins they already had, trying to make them really visible so that people could find the bins in the dark. And then another solution we came up with was this disco bin. So it's playful, it lights up, it has a disco ball, and also when you use it, it plays music for you. So it makes it really fun. It kind of gives you that reward once you've used it, actually, like you can have a bit of a dance, which is great. So I think that was based on our insights about people not being able to find stuff in the dark. And I said I would touch on competitions and how to make them work to make your project more successful. And I'm going to jump back to the big bins because we had one bin in Southampton with this kind of competition going on between Craig David and Scott Mills, who are both from Southampton. So we were tapping into the local audience, knowing that they kind of felt like these 2 people were from their area. And it's kind of behavioral science that we all have an inbuilt drive to win, or for your team to win. And the visible feedback system, so whether you can see 54 people have voted with their litter for Craig David and only 11 for Scott Mills, is really helpful because you feel like you're contributing and you can see the votes tallying up. But one element of competition we hadn't expected with this one is that Scott Mills saw the bins, was doing regular, you saw he was losing to Craig David, and started doing shout outs on his radio show to try and get more people in Southampton to vote for him in this bin. And he went down to Southampton and was getting the local people to try and vote for him. Sadly, he did get whooped by Craig David, but it was great for us. Loads more exposure. And a bit more on competitions. I've tried to think about what could be useful for you in setting up competitions if you want to run them locally. So the prizes should be relevant to the audience. The prize should be sustainable or kind of fit with the goals of your project. But generally vouchers are good as it allows people to buy what they need. But in terms of like fitting with your project, we ran alongside Treasure River, I think we ran a prize, which was a litter-free picnic set so that you could go out with your friends, have a wonderful picnic, get loads of food, but do so in a way that wouldn't leave any litter behind. And this is the result of a campaign we ran in Bristol called Bristol's Binning. We partnered with an app called Litter Lotto. And the idea is that you download the app, you take a picture of yourself putting litter into a bin, and every time you do that and upload the picture, that's one entry for you into a competition. And on the app, you could win between £5,000 and £10,000. And it was great for us because we were able to track that 34,500 people had binned litter and entered themselves into that lottery, which was great. And I guess some quick tips on social media competitions is that most people on social media don't post. Or if they do post, what they want to post is them at their best. So they're unlikely to post a picture of them doing something that's just for a competition, especially if it's binning litter. So the best way to engage people in a competition on Instagram is probably posting stories or in comments. And that's a great way to get engagement with your competitions there. And then just some quick thoughts is that remembering GDPR, don't collect more personal details than you need for getting for a competition, and also make sure that you gain permission to contact them again about the competition if they've won, and try and be clear about the conditions needed for winning and when to do things by certain dates. But if there are any questions about setting rewards or how to use competitions to gain engagement, I'll try and answer them later, but those were just some ideas. But that's everything from me. I'll hand over to Jess and Cecily.